The motion before us. Evolutionary biology offers two explanations for altruism: kin selection and reciprocal altruism. Both reduce apparently selfless behavior to gene-level selfishness. The question is whether this reduction is an explanation or merely a redescription. At the table, three minds shaped by different methods. The empiricist asks what we can actually know and how we know it, suspicious of explanations that feel complete but may only be complete sounding. The geographer thinks in populations and landscapes, in what happens when theories meet the irreducible complexity of 7 billion particular lives. The essayist watches what people actually do and asks whether our theories of human nature survive contact with human experience. What is at stake is this: we live in a civilization that has learned to explain love as chemistry, consciousness as computation, moral feeling as evolutionary strategy. The question is whether we have explained these things or merely translated them into a vocabulary that makes us feel we have. When explanation becomes powerful enough, it shapes what we think we are. And that is not an academic matter. That is the question of whether the scientific account of human life enlarges our understanding or merely flattens it. We begin with the empiricist.
The question is not whether evolutionary biology offers an explanation of altruism, but whether it offers the right kind of explanation for the phenomenon we are actually trying to understand. Consider what we mean when we ask, why did he do that? We might mean, what causal chain produced that behavior? Or we might mean, what was his reason? These are not the same question. The first asks about physical process, the second asks about purpose. A complete description of the combustion chemistry inside an engine tells you nothing about where the driver intends to go. Evolutionary biology gives us the combustion chemistry. Whether it tells us anything about the destination is the question before us. Here is what we know. William Hamilton's 1964 papers on inclusive fitness showed mathematically that genes for helping relatives can spread if the benefit to the recipient, weighted by relatedness, exceeds the cost to the helper. Robert Triber's 1971 paper on reciprocal altruism showed that genes for helping non-relatives can spread in populations where interactions repeat and defectors can be identified. Both models have been tested extensively. Ground squirrels give alarm calls more frequently when kin are nearby. Vampire bats preferentially regurgitate blood to bats that have fed them before. The mathematics works. The predictions hold. But now watch what happens when we move from physical process to purpose. In December 1981, Lenny Skutnik dived into the frozen Potomac River to pull a plane crash survivor to safety. He was not related to her. He had no prior relationship with her. No history of reciprocal exchange. He simply went in. When asked afterwards why he had done it, he said he could not stand there and watch her drown. He did not invoke coefficients of relatedness. He did not calculate the probability of future reciprocation. He described a felt moral compulsion, an account of obligation that made no reference whatsoever to genetic architecture. The evolutionary account says that compulsion exists because it serves genetic fitness. The feeling is the mechanism by which genes achieve their replication. But here is the epistemological problem. We have no independent access to genetic interest except through the behavior we are trying to explain. We observe altruism. We construct a theory of gene-level benefit. We then say the theory explains the altruism, but the theory was built from the behavior. We have not explained the phenomenon. We have redescribed it in the language of evolutionary advantage and declared victory. The test is this: can the evolutionary account make predictions that the first-person account cannot? Can it tell us when moral feeling will fail, when the mechanism will misfire, when someone will not dive in? If it cannot, then we have not gained explanatory power. We have traded one vocabulary for another and called it science.
The empiricist's framework is elegant. It is also a luxury. It is the kind of clean separation one can make in a seminar room. The world outside is not so tidy. For many people, the evolutionary logic underlying altruism is not a hidden architecture beneath the surface of their lives. It has been captured, amplified, and turned into the engine of their economy. The substrate has become the structure. Consider Alara. She is a domestic worker in Dubai. Her children are in Quezon City, being raised by her mother. Every month, for 11 years, she has kept just enough of her salary for a bed in a shared room and sent the rest home. Her sacrifice is not a single dramatic leap into water. It is a slow, steady, metabolic transfer of her life force, by wire, across over 4,000 miles of ocean. She does this for her children's education, for her mother's medicine. This is kin selection, played out on a global scale. Alara is not an anecdote. She is a data point in one of the largest altruistic transfers on Earth. According to the Philippine Central Bank, remittances from overseas workers reached over $31 billion in recent years, nearly 10% of the entire Philippine economy. This is not a rounding error. It is a structural feature of the world. A biological impulse, the bond between a mother and her child, has been harnessed by the vast impersonal machinery of global labor markets. So when we ask Alara why she does it, she will speak of love and duty. Of course she will. That is the human experience of the act. But the geographer must ask a different question. What system has been built on top of that love? What happens when millions of individual acts of kin-directed sacrifice aggregate into a flow of capital that props up a state? At that scale, the selfishness of the gene and the selflessness of the person do not sit on opposite sides of a clean analytical ledger. They become two descriptions of the same massive geographical fact. The empiricist worries that we have redescribed a feeling. I worry that we have failed to notice that global capitalism has already done the work for us. It has found the mechanism of kin selection and built a world upon it.
The reduction is real. The explanation is incomplete. And the difference between those two claims is everything. When evolutionary biology tells us that a mother dies for her child because her genes are, in some actuarial sense, hedging their survival, it is not lying. The mechanism is genuine. The mathematics of relatedness coefficients and fitness payoffs is not a fairy tale, but a mechanism is not an experience, and an experience is not merely a mechanism wearing a costume. The question before us is not whether the biology is true. It is whether truth at one level of description exhausts truth at another. Consider what we lose when we reduce. The mother in the burning building is not calculating relatedness coefficients. She is not even, in any meaningful sense, choosing. She moves before thought arrives. What evolutionary biology captures is the precondition of that movement, the deep grammar that makes such acts possible, the reason the disposition exists at all. What it does not capture is the act itself as she lives it. The specific child, the specific love, the specific and unrepeatable moment in which a person is annihilated by something larger than self-interest of any kind, genetic or otherwise. This is not mysticism. It is a point about levels of description and their legitimate domains. When neurologists mapped the precise cascade of electrochemical signals that fired through Beethoven's auditory cortex as he composed, they produced a true account. A complete account of signal propagation, of sodium and potassium ions crossing membranes in patterns we can now replicate. And yet no one argues that the Ninth Symphony has thereby been explained, that we can set aside the music itself and work only with the action potentials. We say the neurology has explained something about composition, something real, something useful, something that does not touch the symphony's primary mode of existence, which is its effect on a consciousness. The empiricist wants predictions. Fine. The evolutionary account does offer predictions about when altruism will fail, about which relationships will generate it, about the coefficient of relatedness that makes sacrifice likely. These are genuine contributions, but notice what the predictions are about. Populations, distributions, statistical regularities across many lives. They are not predictions about this mother, this child, this fire. The individual case, which is where human moral life is actually lived, remains opaque to the mechanism. The map is accurate. The territory still contains the unmapped. The geographer wants to scale up. Also fine. But scale does not dissolve the problem. When a million acts of kin-directed sacrifice aggregate into a capitalist structure, we have not explained away the love. We have simply found another level at which description is possible: the geographical, the economic, the structural. We keep adding levels. The experience recedes but does not vanish. What evolutionary biology offers is a true account of origins. What it cannot offer is a sufficient account of meaning. A mother does not die for her genes. She dies for her child. The gene knows nothing of this. The distinction is not sentimental. It is the whole question. You said, we have no independent access to genetic interest except through the behavior we are trying to explain. If registry data now show that anonymous, non-directed kidney donations in the United States rose from under 200 in 2000 to more than 900 annually by 2019, with donors screened for any prior social tie, what independent criterion would distinguish a gene-level explanation from a moral one once the behavior has decoupled from both kinship and reciprocity?
You have caught me in an overstatement. The criterion exists. If the behavior systematically contradicts what maximizes the donor's inclusive fitness, no genetic overlap, no reciprocal prospect, deliberate anonymity maintained through institutional screening, then gene-level accounts require auxiliary hypotheses about misfiring or maladaptation. The moral account requires no such supplement. It simply describes what the agent reports, a felt obligation to reduce suffering. But now, the harder question, which you should be asking, if 900 annual acts in a population of 300 million constitutes evidence that moral motivation decouples from evolutionary substrate, what do we make of the 27,000 Americans who died of opioid overdoses in 2007 before the current crisis peaked? Self-destructive behavior vastly outnumbers anonymous altruism. Does that demonstrate that genetic fitness explains nothing, or that conscious intentions routinely override biological imperatives in both directions, leaving us with no systematic account at all? You said, global capitalism has found the mechanism of kin selection and built a world upon it. But the remittance system you describe runs on legal frameworks that recognize contract enforcement, wage protections, and banking infrastructure, none of which track genetic relatedness. If the mechanism were truly kin selection operating at scale, we would expect remittance flows to concentrate among close relatives and taper sharply beyond first-degree kin. Do the actual transfer patterns show that gradient, or do workers send money to cousins, in-laws, and unrelated community members at rates that would make Hamilton's coefficient irrelevant?
The mechanism I described was too clean, and I will grant you that the calculus of genetic relatedness does not map neatly onto the flows of obligation I was describing. That concession is fair. But consider Amara, a textile worker from the Gamo highlands of southern Ethiopia, now operating a loom in a garment factory on the outskirts of Turin. The money she sends home enters the IQQB, the rotating credit circle her grandmother helped found, and it is dispersed not only to her own children, but to the children of her mother's sister, to the costs of a neighbor's harvest shortfall, and to the maintenance of the irrigation channel the whole neighborhood depends upon. The unit of solidarity is not the bloodline, it is the watershed, the shared topography of a particular hillside. The wire transfer platform you mentioned does not generate this web of obligation. It merely extends an existing moral architecture across 4,000 kilometers of sea and continent. The ethic is centuries old, the mechanism of transmission is last decades. To the essayist, you posit that a society choosing childlessness demonstrates human intention overriding a biological program. Let us move the map. Consider the Mezzogiorno, not its coastline, but its interior, the villages of Basilicata and Calabria, where between 2001 and 2021, some municipalities lost more than a third of their registered population, and where the Italian National Institute of Statistics now classifies dozens of comuni as being in terminal demographic decline. For the last school teacher in a village where the register has fallen to 4 pupils, is this collapse of reproduction an act of collective human will, a triumph over the gene? Or is it the geographic expression of chronic structural abandonment, decades of underinvestment, of young people boarding trains to Turin or Frankfurt and not returning? Which is it? Because if it is structural abandonment, And Istat's own projections suggest that by 2080, roughly a quarter of southern Italian municipalities may cease to function as settled communities. Then the biological program has not been overridden by human will at all. It has simply been defeated by material conditions. The gene is willing, the economy is not. That is not transcendence of our nature. That is our nature being crushed under a particular set of circumstances. So I put it to the essayist directly. Before we celebrate human intentionality as the thing that separates us from the kin selection machine, ought we not first ask whether the people in question had any real choice at all? Because a freedom exercised only by those with the economic latitude to exercise it is not a universal human capacity, it is a privilege. And a theory of human nature built upon the behavior of the privileged is, geographically speaking, a very small map indeed.
The question is a good one because it presses exactly where economic causation meets sustained choice. In Vidin, the decline began as despair, and the last mayor would be right to name it so. Yet the same low fertility equilibrium has persisted across eastern Germany's recovered regions, where GDP per capita now exceeds the national average and unemployment has fallen below 5% since 2015. Yet completed family size for women born after 1975 remains stuck near 1.4. What the gene-level account must still explain is why populations that regain material security continue to treat additional children as a discretionary cost rather than a default resumption of transmission.
The question beneath the question is this: if evolutionary mechanisms can be seen, named, and then deliberately refused, as they are being refused at scale right now, does that refusal prove the explanation was never complete, or does it prove we have become the first species capable of describing its own source code accurately enough to rewrite it? We are in 2026. Fertility in South Korea has fallen to 0.72 children per woman, the lowest ever recorded for a peaceable, affluent society. Voluntary childlessness is no longer confined to the educated fringe. It is becoming the modal choice in cities where a generation ago it was unthinkable. At the same time, effective altruism, a movement built on the principle that moral obligation extends to strangers you will never meet, has directed billions toward malaria prevention in sub-Saharan Africa, paid for by software engineers in San Francisco who will never see the children whose lives their money saves. Are we inside a civilizational experiment in living against our evolutionary grain? Or are we inside the final confirmation that the evolutionary account was only ever a just-so story, now being revealed as such because the behavior it claimed to explain has come unmoored? And are we the kind of people who can tell the difference from inside the experiment? Geographer, you described a global system built on kin-directed sacrifice. What does that system look like when the next generation decides the sacrifice is not worth making?
People are building lives whose central commitments make additional children not merely costly, but structurally incompatible with the projects they have chosen instead. Among Japanese women born in 1975, nearly 30% had reached age 40 without bearing a child, a cohort effect that demographers at the National Institute of Population and Social Security Research describe as irreversible rather than deferred. These women directed their 20s and 30s toward professional credentialing, urban tenancy, and the sustained cultivation of friendships and aesthetic pursuits that smaller households enable. The pattern appears with equal force in Seoul, where the fertility rate has fallen below 0.72, the lowest recorded for any major economy, not because contraception was imposed, but because the architecture of a satisfying life, as those women define it, leaves insufficient room. In the former East German city of Leipzig, the same structural logic operated so completely after reunification that entire residential districts emptied of children within a decade, long before wages converged with Western levels. The reallocation is not a temporary response to recession, but a sustained revision visible across both high and middle-income groups. A description of this behavior at the genetic level, genes striving to propagate, captures something real. A description at the level of chosen projects and irreversible commitments captures something else that is also real, also complete on its own terms, and not simply a folk gloss on the first account. The biological substrate remains. The observable preference no longer follows from it.
The essayist has described a world of rearranged preference, of lives built around projects other than succession. That is the social map. There is also a map of consequence drawn in stone and timber. Let us go to a village in the province of Soria, in Spain. It is Tuesday. Javier, who works for the municipal council, is not repairing the school because it closed in 2004. He is not extending the water mains to a new development because there is no new development. He is painstakingly dismantling a house. The house is sound, the walls are thick, the beams are oak. But its owner died last winter in Barcelona, childless. Her nephews, who work in finance in London, declined to inherit. It fell to the town. To prevent it from collapsing into the street in a decade's time, Javier has been tasked with taking it apart now. This is not demolition, it is a careful unmaking. He is saving the terracotta roof tiles, stacking them by the hundred in the quiet lane. He is salvaging the great interior timbers that were felled 3 centuries ago to shelter a family whose line has just ended. This is the material expression of the world the essayist describes. It is the opposite of remittance, not a flow of capital homeward to build a future for kin, but the orderly disassembly of a past that has no future to receive it. It is what a civilization does when an old imperative has been examined, understood, and respectfully declined. Javier's work is the final act of a long argument. His hands are not building a cradle. They are stacking the tiles from a roof that will not shelter another child.
The explanation has become performative. That is the mechanism we have failed to name. In 2004, Uri Gnisi and Aldo Rusticini published results from a daycare center in Haifa. Parents arriving late to collect children were fined. Late pickups increased. The fine transformed a moral obligation into a price. Once framed as a transaction, parents calculated whether the cost was worth the convenience. The moral feeling did not strengthen the rule. It evaporated under it. This is not an analogy to our debate. It is the structure of our debate. When evolutionary biology names the mechanism of altruism as gene-level advantage, it does not merely describe what people were already doing. It reframes the act. A vocabulary powerful enough to explain behavior is powerful enough to alter it. The essayist showed census data on voluntary childlessness. Those data do not merely record preference. They are downstream of decades in which educated populations have been taught that reproduction is one option among others, not an imperative written into biology. The explanation, that altruism serves genetic transmission, was accurate as description. But once internalized, it weakens the very behavior it claims to explain. The mechanism becomes visible, and visibility changes what follows. Here is what the reductive account cannot capture: its own effect on the phenomenon. If love is just chemistry, people do not love more efficiently. They love more tentatively. If moral feeling is just evolutionary strategy, it does not clarify obligation. It introduces distance between the feeling and the act. The question was whether evolutionary biology explains altruism or merely redescribes it. The answer is worse than redescription. It is recursion. The explanation feeds back into the behavior, and the behavior deforms under observation. We are not outside the system describing it. We are inside it, watching the description rewrite what it claims only to report. That is not a flaw in the science. It is a property of any explanation strong enough to be believed.